The vast emptiness of space stretched before the Valari observation post like a dark canvas spotted with distant stars. Officer Nick stood at his station, his four-fingered hands moving gracefully across the control panel. His large silver eyes reflected the glow of the screens as he monitored the quiet sector of space that marked the outer boundary of Valari Federation territory. Another quiet shift, he said to himself, his voice a soft, melodic sound that echoed in the empty room. The peace was broken by a sudden alert. A red light pulsed on his console, accompanied by a gentle chime. Nick straightened, his thin frame tensing as he checked the readings. An unidentified vessel had entered Valari space. "Commander Trell," Nix called through the communication system. "We have an unknown ship at the edge of Sector 7. Within moments, Commander Trell entered the observation room. Unlike Nix, who had the typical slender build of most Valari, Trell was broad-shouldered and tall. His skin had a deeper blue tone, marking him as one who had spent time on the outer colonies. "Show me," Trell ordered, coming to stand beside Nix. The main screen lit up with an image of the unknown vessel. It was unlike anything they had seen before, bulky and angular with none of the smooth curves that characterized Valari ships. Multiple protrusions dotted its hull, which Nix quickly identified as weapon systems. "It's armed," Trell noted, his eyes narrowing. "Heavily." "Yes, Commander, but our scans indicate the technology is primitive by our standards." Trell studied the vessel for a long moment. "Primitive doesn't mean harmless. Run a full scan. I want to know what we're dealing with." Nix nodded and initiated the scan sequence. The Valari Federation had encountered many species in their long history of space exploration. Most were peaceful, or at least reasonable. Some were not. Caution was always wise. The scan began to return data, and Nix frowned at the readings. "That's odd," he muttered. "What is it?" Trell asked, leaning closer to see the screen. "The ship's construction. It doesn't match any known design in our database, and there's something strange about its power systems." The ship was identified in its own markings as the UES Thunderchild. UES, they would later learn, stood for United Earth Ship. As more data flowed in, Nix's confusion grew. He called over several other officers to verify his findings. The room soon filled with the soft murmur of concerned voices. "Commander," said Nix, his voice strained, "you need to see this." Trell looked at the detailed scan results now filling the screen. His expression hardened as he processed what he was seeing. "This can't be right," he said. "Run the scan again." Nix did as ordered, but the results came back the same. The Thunderchild was designed in a way that defied Valari logic. Its systems were built with multiple redundancies, not just 2 backups, which would be reasonable, but 3, 4, sometimes more for critical systems. "What kind of species builds a ship like this?" asked one of the junior officers. "One that expects things to fail," Trell replied grimly. "One that prepares for disaster." Further scans revealed more troubling details. The ship's outer hull was reinforced beyond what seemed necessary for normal space travel. Internal compartments could be sealed off in sections, allowing the ship to function even if large portions were damaged or exposed to vacuum. "The life forms aboard," Nix reported. "They appear to be bipedal, similar to several species we've encountered before, but their biological readings are unusual." The scans showed creatures with remarkable resilience. Their bodies contained systems that could respond rapidly to injury, clotting mechanisms to quickly stop blood loss, and an immune system designed to fight off a wide range of pathogens. But what truly disturbed the Valari scanning team was the ship's weapon systems. Unlike Valari defensive weapons, which were designed primarily to disable rather than destroy, the human weapons showed no such restraint. They were created with one purpose: to inflict maximum damage. Most concerning of all, many of these weapon systems had their own power supplies, separate from the main reactor. They could still function even if the rest of the ship was crippled. "They designed this vessel to keep fighting even when it's dying," Trell said, his voice barely above a whisper. The concept was alien to the Volari, who valued life above all else. Their own ships had excellent defensive capabilities but limited offensive weapons. When faced with certain defeat, Volari protocol was to retreat or surrender to preserve lives. The idea of continuing to fight when all hope was lost seemed not just foolish but barbaric. As the scan continued, they intercepted some internal communications from the ship. The universal translators struggled at first but soon began to make sense of the language. "This is Captain Reynolds to engineering. How are those shield modifications coming along?" "Almost there, Captain. Another hour and we'll have boosted capacity by 30%. "Good work. And the new targeting system?" "Tested and online, sir. Accuracy improved by 25%. The Volari listened in silence. The humans were improving their weapons, even as they traveled through space. They were preparing for something. A final detailed scan of the ship's database revealed fragments of human history, images of wars, conflicts spanning centuries, technologies developed for the purpose of killing. A species that had fought itself countless times before reaching the stars. Nix's hands trembled as he finished the report. His silver eyes were wide with a mix of fear and disbelief. "Commander," he said, his voice barely steady, "I believe we've encountered a species of warriors." Trell stood silently, watching the human ship on the main screen. It continued on its course, unaware it was being observed. Or perhaps, he thought with a chill, they were aware and simply didn't care. "Alert the High Council," Trell ordered finally. "Tell them we've made first contact with a new species, and we need to proceed with extreme caution." As Nix hurried to relay the message, Trell remained fixed on the image of the Thunder Child. What kind of evolutionary path created beings that built such ships? What kind of history shaped a species to always prepare for the worst? And most importantly, what would these humans do when they discovered they weren't alone in the universe? For the first time in his long career, Commander Trell felt a sensation he barely recognized: fear. Not just for himself or his crew, but for the entire Volari Federation. The humans were coming, and they came prepared for war. The Volari High Council chamber fell silent as Commander Trell finished presenting his initial report. 12 council members sat around the curved table, their silvery eyes wide with concern. The room's soft blue lighting cast gentle shadows across their faces. "This data cannot be correct," said Elder Miro, the oldest council member. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. "No species would build ships designed to continue fighting after sustaining fatal damage." "I've verified the scans myself," Trell replied firmly. "The data is accurate." The main display showed detailed images of the human warship, the UES Thunderchild. Officer Nix stood beside the display, ready to explain their findings in greater detail. "With your permission," Nix said, "I will show you the most concerning anomalies we discovered." Elder Lena, head of the council, nodded. "Proceed, officer." Nix touched the control panel, and the display zoomed in on the ship's power systems. First, observe their power grid. Unlike our vessels, which use a single main reactor with one backup, the human ship has its primary reactor here, he pointed to the center of the ship, but also has 3 smaller reactors positioned throughout the vessel. "Perhaps they simply have higher power requirements?" suggested another council member. "That was our initial thought," Nix continued. "But upon further analysis, we discovered each reactor is capable of independently powering essential systems. If the main reactor fails, the ship doesn't just switch to emergency power. It can continue almost all functions using these backup systems." He changed the display to show the ship's life support systems. Their air recycling system has 4 separate units, each able to support the entire crew. Their water purification system is similarly redundant. "This is basic safety," Elder Miro argued. "All ships have backup life support." "Yes," Trell interjected, "but our backups are designed to keep the crew alive until they can reach safety or be rescued. These systems are designed to keep the ship operational for extended periods, even after taking significant damage." Nix nodded and changed the display again. "Now, observe their hull design." The image showed cross-sections of the ship's outer shell. Unlike the smooth, continuous hulls of Volari vessels, The human ship's hull was divided into multiple compartments, each with its own reinforced walls. Their hull is segmented, Nix explained. If one section is breached, automatic doors seal off the damaged area. The ship can lose up to 70% of its internal volume to vacuum and still function. Murmurs of disbelief filled the council chamber. But the most disturbing elements, Nix continued, switching the display to the ship's weapon systems, are these. The council stared at the array of weapons mounted on the human vessel. Missile launchers, energy projectors, and what appeared to be kinetic weapons lined the hull. Each weapon system has dedicated power supplies separate from the main grid. They can continue firing even if the ship loses main power. Some weapons can even be operated manually if electronic systems fail. Manually? Elder Lena asked, her voice barely audible. You mean they would send crew members to physically operate weapons during combat? Yes, Elder, Nix confirmed. And that's not all. We detected training protocols in their computer systems. The humans regularly practice something called damage control drills. They simulate severe damage to the ship and train to fight while parts of their vessel are exposed to vacuum or on fire. The council chamber was utterly silent now. The concept was almost incomprehensible to the Volari, whose entire philosophy centered around preservation of life. Their own military training focused on preventing conflict or retreating when necessary to save lives. There's more, Trell said grimly. Show them the crew quarters, Nix. The display changed to show the interior of the human ship. The living spaces were small and utilitarian, but what caught everyone's attention were the personal weapons stored in each crew member's quarters. Every human on board appears to be armed, Nix explained. Not just the security personnel. Everyone, including medical staff and engineers. They all carry personal weapons and appear to receive combat training. This doesn't make sense, Elder Miro said, shaking his head. A species cannot evolve to be this aggressive and still advance to space travel. They would destroy themselves first. Perhaps that is why they are so prepared, Trell suggested. Our historians are analyzing the fragments of human history we were able to retrieve from their databases. It appears they have indeed fought numerous wars among themselves. They may have developed these defensive capabilities because they expect all other species to be as aggressive as they are. Elder Lena stood up, her tall frame casting a long shadow across the table. We need more information before we decide how to proceed. Commander Trell, continue monitoring the human vessel, but do not make contact. Officer Nix, I want a full analysis of their biological makeup. Perhaps understanding their physical form will help us understand their psychology. As the council meeting ended, Nix and Trell walked together down the curved corridor leading from the chamber. Do you think they're as dangerous as their ship suggests? Nix asked quietly. Trell considered the question carefully. I've studied many species in my career, Nix. Usually technology reflects evolutionary history. A species that builds ships, designed to keep fighting even when mortally wounded, that suggests a history where surrender meant extinction. But why would they arm everyone on board? Even their healers carry weapons. Perhaps, Trell said thoughtfully, on their world, everyone needed to be a warrior at times. Maybe they faced threats we cannot imagine. They reached the lift that would take them back to the observation center. As the doors closed, Trell added, or perhaps they are the threat that other species fear. Back in the observation center, the main screen still showed the UES Thunderchild moving steadily through space. Its course remained unchanged, heading deeper into Volari territory. Begin the biological scan, Trell ordered as they entered. I want to know everything about these humans, their strengths, their weaknesses, and most importantly, what drives them to build ships ready for war. The scanning team began their work, focusing powerful sensors on the human vessel. As data began to stream in, the first images of human bodies appeared on the screens. Nix stared at the readings, his silver eyes growing wider. Commander, he said, his voice barely a whisper, you need to see this. Trell moved quickly to Nix's side. What he saw made his blood run cold. The human biology was unlike anything they had encountered before, a combination of fragility and Incredible resilience that made no evolutionary sense. How can a species be this contradictory? Trell murmured. The mystery of the humans only deepened, and with it, the Valari's fear of what first contact might bring. Impossible, whispered Medical Officer Vara as she studied the biological scan results. Her delicate blue fingers moved rapidly over the control panel, recalibrating the sensors. These readings cannot be correct. Commander Trell and Officer Nick stood behind her in the medical analysis lab. The room hummed with the soft sounds of advanced equipment. Large screens displayed detailed images of human anatomy, skeletal structures, organ systems, cellular compositions. Run the scan again, Trell ordered, his voice tight with tension. Vara nodded and reset the system. Minutes later, the same results appeared on the screen. The data is accurate, Commander, she confirmed, her silver eyes wide with disbelief. These humans are remarkable. Explain, Trell demanded. Vara touched the screen, highlighting the human skeletal system. First, observe their bones. They're made of living tissue that constantly rebuilds itself. If damaged, they can heal completely over time. Many species have regenerative capabilities, Nix pointed out. Yes, but look at this, Vara continued, zooming in on a cellular image. Their blood contains specialized cells that rush to wounds, forming clots to stop bleeding. They have an immune system that adapts to new threats, remembering pathogens it has encountered before. She switched to another image, showing a human heart. Their cardiovascular system is designed for both endurance and sudden bursts of extreme activity. They can maintain slow, steady exertion for days or switch to intense output in seconds. A predator adaptation, Trell noted grimly. Yes, but also prey, Vara replied, surprising them both. These biological systems suggest a species that evolved as both hunter and hunted. They can chase prey to exhaustion, but they can also flee from threats over long distances. Nix frowned, trying to understand. How can a species evolve as both? I don't know, Vara admitted. It's contradictory, but there's more. She brought up an image of the human digestive system. They can eat almost anything. Their digestive tract can process a wide variety of foods, both plant and animal. They can survive on diverse diets, adapting to whatever nutrition is available. A survival advantage, Trell observed. Exactly. And look at this, Vara said, displaying thermal images of human bodies. They regulate body temperature internally. They can survive in freezing environments by generating heat, and in hot environments by cooling themselves through a process called sweating. Nix shook his head in amazement. So they can live almost anywhere? Within limits, yes. Far wider limits than most species we've encountered, Vara confirmed. But perhaps most disturbing is this. She pulled up images of the human nervous system and brain. Their pain response. What about it? Trell asked. It can be overridden, Vara explained. When these humans experience extreme stress or danger, their bodies release chemicals that can temporarily block pain signals. They can continue functioning despite injuries that would incapacitate most species. A heavy silence fell over the room as the three Valari considered the implications. Their own species had evolved on a peaceful world with few predators. Pain was an important warning signal that prevented further injury. The idea of continuing to function while injured seemed unnatural, even dangerous. But the most fascinating aspect, Vara continued, is their adaptability. Look at their muscle structure. The screen showed human muscle tissue at a cellular level. Their muscles grow stronger when regularly stressed. Their bones become denser when subjected to repeated impact. Their lungs increase capacity when trained at high altitudes. They improve with hardship? Nix asked incredulously. Yes, their bodies actually adapt to difficult conditions by becoming stronger, Vara confirmed. It's as if they were designed to overcome challenges. Trell paced the room, his mind racing. A species that grows stronger when faced with adversity. That explains so much about their ship design. There's one more thing, Vara said quietly. She pulled up images from the ship's medical bay. We accessed their medical records. These humans have survived injuries that would be fatal to us. Look. The screen showed medical reports with accompanying images. Humans who had lost limbs, survived penetrating wounds to vital organs, endured massive blood loss, or recovered from severe burns. "They can live through this?" Nix asked, his voice barely audible. "Not only live, but often return to full duty," Vera said. "Their medical technology is not as advanced as ours in many ways, but their bodies' natural healing abilities are extraordinary." Trell stared at the images, a new understanding dawning. "They don't build ships ready for war because they want to fight," he said slowly. "They build them because they expect to be hurt, and they know they can survive." "Commander," a voice called from the communication system, "we've completed analysis of the human historical records we retrieved. Display them here," Trell ordered. The screens changed to show images from Earth's history. The Volari watched in silence as scenes of human conflict through the ages appeared before them. Ancient battles with primitive weapons, world wars, with mechanized destruction, and finally, the conflicts that preceded their venture into space. "So much fighting," Nix whispered. "How did they not destroy themselves?" "Because they always adapted," Trell realized. Each conflict taught them to build better defenses, more efficient weapons, and more resilient societies. "What do we do, Commander?" Vora asked. "The High Council is waiting for our recommendation." Trell considered for a long moment. The decision before them was momentous. First contact with a species unlike any they had encountered before. "We have 3 options," he finally said. "We can retreat and avoid contact entirely. We can approach diplomatically and hope their intentions are peaceful. Or we can prepare for conflict, assuming they are as aggressive as their biology and history suggest." "The Council will be divided," Nix noted. "Elder Miro will argue for retreat while others will push for diplomatic contact. Perhaps there is a 4th option," said a quiet voice from the doorway. They turned to see Junior Officer Lex, who had been monitoring the human ship's communications. "Speak, Junior Officer," Trell encouraged. "What if we observe them more closely before deciding?" Lex suggested. "We have stealth technology they cannot detect. We could learn more about their behavior, see how they interact among themselves when they don't know they're being watched." Trell considered the idea. It was cautious yet practical, gathering more information before making such a critical decision. "Prepare a stealth observation drone," he ordered. "We'll get closer to the human ship and see these creatures in their natural habitat. Perhaps then we'll understand whether they come as friends or conquerors." As the others hurried to follow his orders, Trell remained in the lab staring at the images of human biology. A species shaped by conflict, strengthened by adversity, capable of surviving terrible injuries, and now traveling among the stars. "What are you?" he whispered to the image of a human on the screen. "And what will you do when you find us?" The stealth drone glided silently through the vacuum of space, its advanced cloaking technology making it invisible to conventional sensors. It approached the UES Thunderchild carefully, maintaining a safe distance while its powerful observation equipment focused on the human vessel. Inside the Volari command ship, Commander Trell, Officer Nix, and Junior Officer Lex watched the live feed from the drone. The main screen showed the exterior of the human warship in stunning detail. "Magnify Section 3, Trell ordered. "There's movement." The image zoomed in on a portion of the hull where a large airlock door was sliding open. 2 small figures emerged, connected to the ship by thin tethers. "They're going outside their vessel," Nick said, his voice filled with wonder. "In space." The humans wore bulky white suits that protected them from the vacuum. They moved with practiced ease, using small propulsion units attached to their backs to maneuver around the hull. "What are they doing?" Lex asked. As they watched, one human anchored itself to the hull while the other began working on what appeared to be a weapon system. "They're performing maintenance," Trell realized, "on their weapons, while in space." "That's incredibly dangerous," Nix commented. "Why, not do this work inside where it's safe?" "Perhaps they can't," Lex suggested, "or perhaps this is faster." The humans worked methodically, replacing components and adjusting settings. After about an hour, they returned to the airlock and disappeared inside the ship. Switch to internal observation, Trell commanded. The drone's sensors adjusted, using specialized technology to peer through the hull of the ship. The image quality wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough to see what was happening inside. The view showed a large room where about 20 humans were gathered. Some stood in a circle, while others sat on the floor. 2 humans in the center appeared to be fighting. "Are they having a conflict?" Nix asked, alarmed. "A mutiny?" Lex, who had been studying human behavior patterns from their historical records, shook her head. "I don't think so. Look at the others. They're not intervening. This appears to be training." Indeed, the humans watching were calling out encouragement to the 2 in the center. After one human pinned the other to the floor, they both stood up, shook hands, and 2 different humans took their place. "They practice combat among themselves," Trell noted. "Even on a peaceful mission." The observation continued for hours as the drone moved around the ship, its sensors capturing different aspects of human life aboard the Thunderchild. They saw humans eating together in a communal area, working at various stations, and even engaging in recreational activities. Despite the military nature of their vessel, the humans seemed to laugh often. "They're very social," Nix observed. "They touch each other frequently, clasping hands, patting shoulders." "A bonding behavior," Lex explained. "Their historical records suggest humans form strong group loyalties." Suddenly, the drone's feed picked up a new activity that made all 3 Volari freeze in shock. A group of humans had entered a large chamber wearing only minimal clothing. The chamber appeared to be depressurizing. "What are they doing?" Nix gasped. "They'll die." The humans put on simple masks connected to small air tanks, but left the rest of their bodies exposed. As the chamber fully depressurized, simulating the vacuum of space, the humans began moving around, communicating through hand signals. "They're training to survive in vacuum," Trell realized, his voice barely a whisper. "With minimal protection." "How is this possible?" Nix asked. "No species can survive vacuum exposure. Remember their biology," Lex reminded them. "Their bodies can endure extreme conditions for short periods. They're deliberately exposing themselves to vacuum to prepare for emergency situations." The training session lasted only minutes before the chamber repressurized, but it left the Volari observers deeply disturbed. What kind of species would willingly expose themselves to such danger as a routine exercise? The drone continued its observation, moving to what appeared to be the command center of the ship. Captain Reynolds, a tall human with short gray hair, stood looking at a display screen with several officers around him. "The sensors are picking up some unusual readings at coordinates 227 Mark 43, one officer was saying. "Could be a sensor glitch, but it's been consistent for the past 3 hours." Captain Reynolds frowned. "That's the 3rd glitch in that sector. Too consistent to be random. Tactical, run a full sweep with the secondary array." Trell's hearts raced. "They've detected something. Pull the drone back immediately." "It can't be the drone," Nix argued. "Our cloaking technology is perfect." "Apparently not perfect enough," Trell replied. "Move it back now." The drone began to retreat, but it was too late. On the screen, they saw Captain Reynolds stiffen suddenly. "Contact," shouted the tactical officer. Something just changed position at high speed, definitely not a natural phenomenon. "Red alert," Reynolds ordered calmly. "Shields up. Weapons on standby only. Do not target yet." Alarms blared throughout the human ship as crew members rushed to their stations. The efficiency of their response was impressive. Within seconds, the entire vessel had transformed from routine operation to combat readiness. "They know we're watching them," Trell said grimly. "Recall the drone. There's no point in maintaining the pretense." Back on the Volari command ship, the High Council had assembled for an emergency meeting. They watched the recorded observations in silence, their expressions growing more concerned with each passing minute. "These humans are more dangerous than we imagined," Elder Miro said. "They train for combat in vacuum. They deliberately expose themselves to lethal conditions. We should withdraw from this region immediately." "But they haven't shown any aggressive intent," Elder Lena pointed out. "Their weapons remain on standby." They detected our drone but didn't attempt to destroy it. Before the debate could continue, Officer Nix rushed into the chamber. Commanders, the human ship is broadcasting a message, on all frequencies in over 50 different language patterns. Let us hear it, Elder Lena ordered. The message played through the council chamber's speakers. The voice was calm, measured, and unmistakably that of Captain Reynolds. Unknown vessel. This is Captain James Reynolds of the United Earth ship Thunderchild. We know you're there. We've detected your observation devices. We come in peace and seek diplomatic contact with new civilizations. But be advised, we are prepared for otherwise. Please respond within 1 standard hour, or we will be forced to take more direct action to establish communication. A heavy silence fell over the council chamber. The humans knew they were being watched, and now they were demanding a response. What do we do? Elder Miro asked, his voice trembling slightly. Commander Trell stepped forward. We have no choice. We must answer. The humans have found us, and they're not going away. The neutral meeting point was a small uninhabited moon orbiting a gas giant. Its barren rocky surface offered no strategic advantages to either species. 2 ships hovered in orbit above it, the human vessel Thunderchild and the Volari diplomatic cruiser Harmony. On the moon's surface, a temporary structure had been erected. Half was built by humans, half by Volari, with an airlock connecting the 2 sides. The atmosphere inside was a careful mixture that both species could breathe, though neither found it entirely comfortable. Commander Trell stood at the entrance to the Volari section, his heart beating rapidly. Beside him, Elder Lena adjusted her ceremonial robes one final time. Remember, she said quietly, our goal is peaceful first contact. Do not react to any aggressive displays. They may simply be their way of communication. Trell nodded. The diplomatic team is ready. Officer, Nix has prepared translation devices calibrated to their language patterns. And the security measures? Elder Lena asked. In place but concealed, Trell confirmed. As agreed, no visible weapons. The airlock indicator light changed from red to green. The humans were ready. As the door slid open, Trell braced himself for what might come through. Despite all their preparations, despite hours of watching the humans through observation drones, he still felt a primal fear at the thought of standing face to face with these warrior beings. Captain Reynolds entered first. He was taller than Trell had expected, with broad shoulders and a straight posture that radiated authority. Behind him came 3 other humans, a woman with dark skin who appeared to be a science officer, a younger man carrying what looked like communication equipment, and an older man whose function Trell couldn't immediately determine. What struck Trell most was how ordinary they looked. After seeing their ship's capabilities and their training exercises, he had almost expected monsters. Instead, these were simply bipedal beings with expressions that, while alien, seemed recognizably concerned and cautious. Greetings, Elder Lena said, the translation device converting her melodic language into English. I am Elder Lena of the Volari Federation. We welcome you to our territory and hope for peaceful relations between our peoples. Captain Reynolds stepped forward and made a gesture with his right hand, palm flat, raised to shoulder level, the O. Volari had studied this gesture from their observations and knew it was a peaceful greeting, not a threat display. Elder Lena, Commander Trell, Reynolds said, surprising them by using their names and ranks. I am Captain James Reynolds of the United Earth ship Thunderchild. We come seeking peaceful contact and exchange of knowledge. Elder Lena gestured toward the meeting table. Please, join us. The humans and Volari took their seats opposite each other. For a moment, silence filled the room as each group studied the other. I believe, Reynolds finally said, we should address the fact that you have been observing our ship for the past week. Trell felt a flutter of alarm. Had their surveillance been that obvious? Yes, Elder Lena admitted. We detected your vessel entering our space and sought to understand your intentions before making contact. Reynolds nodded. A reasonable precaution. However, I must express concern about the methods used. Covert surveillance can be interpreted as hostile intent, as can arriving in another species' territory with a heavily armed warship, Trell responded, unable to contain himself. Instead of anger, Reynolds' face showed what appeared to be understanding. Fair point, Commander. From your perspective, we must appear threatening. Your ship, Trell said carefully, is designed for combat beyond what seems necessary for exploration. It suggests you expected violence. Reynolds exchanged glances with his officers before responding. Commander Trell, humanity has learned harsh lessons throughout our history. We've found that being prepared for conflict often prevents it from occurring. Your biology, said the human woman, stepping into the conversation, suggests your species evolved in a relatively peaceful environment. Is that correct? Elder Lena looked surprised by the question. Yes, our homeworld had few large predators and abundant resources. How did you determine this? Your physical characteristics, the woman explained. Limited muscle mass, no natural. Weapons like claws or fangs. Large eyes suggesting diurnal activity rather than hunting or hiding in darkness. Science Officer Lisa Park, she added, introducing herself with a slight nod. Humans evolved differently, Reynolds continued. Our planet was filled with dangers, predators, natural disasters, competing hominid species. We survived through adaptation and cooperation. And warfare, Trell added. Reynolds didn't deny it. Yes, our tribes and later our nations fought each other. But we also built together, created art and music, explored our world, and eventually the stars. Your ship, Trell said, still troubled by what they had discovered, is designed to continue fighting even when severely damaged. Your crew trains to survive in vacuum. These are not the actions of a peaceful species. For the first time, Reynolds smiled. It was a strange expression to the Volari, who communicated emotions differently, but they recognized it wasn't threatening. Commander, have you heard the human saying, hope for peace, prepare for war? Trell shook his head. We build our ships to withstand damage not because we want to fight, but because space itself is dangerous. Micrometeorites, radiation, equipment failures, all can kill just as surely as an enemy weapon. We train in vacuum not because we expect to fight there, but because accidents happen and we want our crew to survive them. The older human man spoke up. Your scans of our ship would have shown our agricultural bay, our scientific laboratories, our library of cultural works. Did these suggest a species bent on conquest? Trell hesitated. It was true. Their observations had revealed those aspects of the human vessel as well. But the Volari had focused on the weapons and defenses because they seemed more significant. We saw those, Elder Lena acknowledged. But we also saw weapons, drills, combat training, and redundant systems designed for battle damage. Preparedness is not aggression, Reynolds said firmly. We design our ships to survive because we value life, especially in an environment as hostile as space. A moment of silence fell as the Volari considered this perspective. Perhaps, Elder Lena finally said, we have misunderstood each other. Our fear of your capabilities led us to attribute hostile intent where none existed. And perhaps, Reynolds replied, we should have approached more cautiously, understanding how our ship might appear to a species with a different evolutionary history. The tension in the room eased slightly. Trell found himself studying Captain Reynolds with new eyes. There was strength there, certainly, but also wisdom and restraint. Captain Reynolds, Elder Lena said, the Volari Federation would like to establish formal diplomatic relations with Earth. We have much to learn from each other. Reynolds smiled again, broader this time. The United Earth government would be honored, Elder Lena. This is why we journey among the stars, to find new friends, not new enemies. As the meeting continued, with both sides discussing the details of future diplomatic exchanges, Trell leaned toward Officer Nix. What do you think? He asked quietly. Can we trust them? Nix considered for a moment. They're different from us, shaped by a harsher world. But I believe Captain Reynolds speaks truthfully. They don't seek war. Trell watched as humans and Volari began to relax around each other, the initial fear giving way to curiosity. I hope you're right, he said. Because if humans ever did decide to wage war. He left the thought unfinished, but both knew what he meant. The species that had built the Thunderchild, that trained to fight in vacuum, that could endure injuries, that would kill a Volari. Such beings would be formidable enemies indeed. As if reading his thoughts, Captain Reynolds looked up and met Trell's gaze across the table. "Commander," Reynolds said, "I hope that one day you'll visit our ship as a guest, not an observer. Perhaps then you'll see that what you feared was simply our way of surviving in a dangerous universe." Trell nodded slowly. "I would like that, Captain." And he found, somewhat to his surprise, that he meant it. The stars had always been silent watchers over the planet Valora. For 10,000 years, the Valorian people had looked up at those distant lights and wondered if they were alone in the universe. They had built cities of crystal and light. They had created art that made visitors weep with its beauty. They had developed medicines that could cure almost any disease, but they had never built weapons of war. They had never needed to. The Valorians were a peaceful species. Their blue skin shimmered like water under their twin suns. Their large, dark eyes held centuries of wisdom and kindness. They stood tall and thin, their bodies built for thought rather than battle. For as long as their recorded history existed, they had solved problems with words, not violence. High Counselor Tharix stood at the observation window of the Great Hall of Unity. Below him, the capital city of Sereth spread out like a garden of light. Towers of white stone reached toward the purple sky. Gardens floated between buildings on anti-gravity platforms. Children played in the streets, their laughter carrying up to where he stood. But Tharix was not watching the beauty of his world. He was watching the sky, and what he saw filled his heart with cold fear. 3 weeks ago, the first ships had appeared. They came from the dark spaces between stars, from a region of the galaxy that no one had explored. The ships were massive and black, covered in strange symbols that seemed to move when you looked at them. They had sent no greeting. They had made no attempt at communication. They had simply started killing. The first colony to fall was Valora Minor, a small moon where 10,000 Valorians lived and worked in the mining industry. The attack had lasted less than 1 standard hour. When it was over, nothing remained but rubble and ash. No survivors, no explanations, just death. Tharix remembered the moment he had received the news. He had fallen to his knees and wept. In all of Valorian history, they had never experienced such violence. They had no context for it. They had no way to understand why anyone would do such a thing. The council had gathered immediately. 40 of the wisest Valorians from across their system had come together to discuss what should be done. Some argued for negotiation. Perhaps this was a misunderstanding. Perhaps these aliens had thought Valora Minor was uninhabited. Others argued for evacuation. They could flee to the outer reaches of their system and hide until the threat passed. But then the second attack came, and the third. Within 2 weeks, 11 Valorian settlements had been destroyed. Over 2 million of their people were dead. And still, the enemy said nothing. Still, they made no demands. They simply killed and moved on to the next target. It was Elder Somira who had suggested reaching out to the humans. Tharix remembered how the room had fallen silent at her words. Humans. Everyone in the galaxy knew about humans. They had burst onto the galactic stage only 300 years ago, which was barely a heartbeat in cosmic terms, but in that short time, they had made themselves impossible to ignore. Humans were strange creatures. They were soft and weak compared to most species. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no venom. They could not see in the dark like the Crethians. They could not survive in vacuum like the Molari. They could not regenerate lost limbs like the Torvax. By all logic, they should have been prey, not predators. But humans had something that no other species possessed in quite the same way. They had fire in their souls. They had a drive, a hunger, a relentless need to push forward that bordered on madness. When they encountered a problem, they did not accept it. They did not adapt to it. They destroyed it and built something better in its place. The Valorians had first encountered humans 50 years ago, when a human exploration vessel had stumbled upon their system. The meeting had been peaceful. The humans had been curious and friendly, eager to learn about Valorian culture and share their own. Trade agreements had been signed. Cultural exchanges had been established. Everything had seemed wonderful. But Tharix had heard the stories that came later. Stories about what humans did when their friends were threatened. Stories about wars that had shaken entire sectors of the galaxy. Stories about human soldiers who would fight to the last breath, who would walk into certain death without hesitation, who would burn worlds to protect those they called family. The Valorians had never asked for human military protection. They had not needed it. They had signed trade agreements for food and medicine and technology, nothing more. But now, as their world burned around them, they had no other choice. The message had been sent 3 days ago. It was a simple plea for help. They had explained their situation, described the enemy that was destroying them, and asked if humanity could provide assistance. They had specifically requested medical supplies, evacuation ships, and perhaps some defensive technology that could help them protect their remaining settlements. They had not asked for soldiers. The Valorians still believed, even now, that violence was not the answer. They hoped that if they could evacuate enough of their people, they could negotiate with this enemy. They could find out what they wanted. They could reach some kind of understanding. Therix watched another explosion bloom on the horizon. Another settlement gone. Another 100,000 of his people dead. He closed his eyes and prayed to gods he was not sure existed that the humans would respond soon. Far across the galaxy, in a star system that burned bright with the light of industry, Admiral Victoria Chen stood before a wall of holographic displays. She was a small woman by human standards, barely 5 feet tall, with gray hair cut short and practical. Her face was lined with 60 years of service, 60 years of hard decisions, 60 years of carrying the weight of human military might on her shoulders. She had just finished reading the message from Valora. Around her, the command center of Earth Station Prime hummed with activity. Officers moved between stations, monitoring the 1,000 different operations that kept humanity's military machine running. Ships were being built. Soldiers were being trained. Weapons were being developed. The machine never stopped. Admiral? Her aide, a young lieutenant named Marcus Webb, stood at her side. "What are your orders?" Victoria did not answer immediately. She read the message again, her eyes moving slowly over each word. The Valorians were asking for medical supplies. They were asking for evacuation ships. They were asking for defensive technology. They were not asking for what they actually needed. She had seen reports about the attacking force. The intelligence division had been monitoring the situation for weeks. The enemy called themselves the Dominion of Endless Night. They were an ancient species that had emerged from the galactic core, where stars were packed so tightly that their light merged into a constant blaze. They believed that all life existed only to serve them. They did not negotiate. They did not make treaties. They consumed or destroyed everything in their path. The Dominion had conquered over 40 species in the last 1,000 years. Some of those species no longer existed. The ones that survived did so as slaves, their cultures erased, their identities forgotten. The Dominion did not want resources from Valora. They did not want territory. They wanted submission. Total, absolute, eternal submission. And if they did not get it, they would kill every Valorian in existence. Victoria set down her tablet and walked to the main display. A map of the galaxy spread out before her, with Valora highlighted in red. Around that red dot, a spreading stain of black showed the Dominion's advance. At their current pace, they would reach the Valorian homeworld in approximately 6 weeks. "Get me the Joint Chiefs," Victoria said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of mountains. "All of them. And get me a secure line to the President." Marcus hesitated. "Ma'am, the Valorians only asked for humanitarian aid. They specifically requested no military involvement." Victoria turned to look at him. Her eyes were gray, like storm clouds over a winter sea. In those eyes, Marcus saw something that made him take an involuntary step backward. It was not anger. It was not determination. It was something older and darker. Something that lived in the depths of human nature. Something that emerged only when those they loved were threatened. "The Valorians are our friends," Victoria said. "They have been our friends for 50 years. They have shared their knowledge with us. They have cared for our sick. They have welcomed our people into their homes. And now, they are being murdered by monsters who see them as nothing more than insects to be crushed." She turned back to the display. "The Valorians do not understand war. They have never had to. They think that evacuation and medical supplies will save them. They think that if they can just survive long enough, they can find a peaceful solution." Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "There is no peaceful solution. There is no negotiation. There is no understanding to be reached. The Dominion will not stop until every Valorian is dead or in chains. That is who they are. That is what they do. Marcus swallowed hard. Then what do we do, Admiral? Victoria smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a predator that had just spotted its prey. We do what humans have always done, she said. We go to war. 3 days later, the orders went out. Across human space, ships began to move. Not cargo vessels, not medical frigates, not evacuation transports. Warships, hundreds of warships, gathered from every fleet, every station, every corner of humanity's vast military network. And at the heart of this armada, the dreadnoughts awakened. The dreadnoughts were humanity's answer to impossible odds. Each one was a mobile fortress, 5 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that could shatter moons. Their hulls were made of materials so dense that light itself bent around them. Their engines could push them to speeds that made physics weep. And their crews were the finest warriors humanity had ever produced. There were only 12 dreadnoughts in existence. Building even one required the resources of an entire planet and the labor of millions. They were not deployed for minor conflicts. They were not used for shows of force. They were reserved for moments when humanity faced threats that ordinary ships could not handle. Admiral Chen was aboard the flagship, the UES Righteous Fury. She stood on the bridge, watching as her fleet assembled around her. Through the view screen, she could see the other dreadnoughts taking their positions. The Hammer of God, the Last Sunrise, the Endless Defiance. One by one, they powered up their weapons and reported ready for battle. Fleet status? Victoria asked. Her tactical officer, a scarred veteran named Commander Hassan, checked his displays. All 12 dreadnoughts present and operational. 460 support vessels reporting ready. Total crew complement across the fleet. Approximately 2 million personnel. 2 million humans. 2 million souls willing to cross the galaxy and fight for a species they had never met in person. 2 million warriors ready to burn the heavens for an answer. Victoria nodded. Send a message to the Valorian Council. Tell them help is on the way. On Valora, High Counselor Therix received the message 4 days later. He read it with trembling hands, his large eyes growing wide with confusion. The message was short. It said, Aid convoy en route. Arrival in approximately 3 weeks. Prepare for the end of your nightmare. Therix shared the message with the council. There were sighs of relief around the room. Somira smiled and clasped her hands together. The humans have answered us, she said. They are sending help. We must prepare to receive evacuees and distribute medical supplies. But Therix noticed something that the others had missed. The message had not said what kind of aid was coming. It had not mentioned medical supplies or evacuation ships. It had only said that the nightmare would end. He looked out the window at the burning sky and wondered what, exactly, the humans meant by that. The Dominion fleet continued its advance. More settlements fell. More Valorians died. The enemy seemed unstoppable, an endless tide of black ships that consumed everything in their path. The Valorians tried to negotiate. They sent message after message, offering surrender, offering tribute, offering anything the Dominion might want. Their messages were never answered. The killing continued. Weeks passed. The Dominion drew closer to the homeworld. Emergency shelters were built underground. Food was rationed. A sense of despair began to spread through the population. Some Valorians simply gave up. They stopped going to work. They stopped eating. They sat in their homes and waited for death. Therix did not give up. He spent every day coordinating evacuation efforts, organizing supply distribution, trying to keep hope alive. But even he was beginning to wonder if the humans would arrive in time. Then, exactly 3 weeks after the message had been received, something happened. It started as a ripple in the fabric of space itself, a distortion that spread across the sky like waves on a pond. The Valorians looked up and saw the stars themselves begin to blur and shift. And then the humans arrived. They did not come quietly. They did not come cautiously. They came like a storm breaking over a mountain, like a flood rushing through a valley, like fire spreading across a drought-stricken forest. The first thing that emerged from the distortion was the righteous fury. It came through the fabric of reality like a sword being drawn from its sheath. Behind it came the other dreadnoughts, one after another, their hulls gleaming with the promise of destruction. And around them, like schools of deadly fish, came the support vessels, destroyers, cruisers, carriers, hundreds of ships, filling the sky with steel and fire. On the surface of Valora, the people stopped what they were doing and looked up. They had expected medical frigates and cargo ships. They had expected gentle vessels full of supplies and smiling human doctors. What they saw was the largest war fleet ever assembled in their region of space. Admiral Chen appeared on every screen across the planet. Her face was calm, almost serene, but her eyes held the fire of 1,000 suns. "People of Valora," she said, "we have received your call for help. We are here to answer it." She paused, and her smile became something that made even the gentle Valorians shiver. "But we did not bring medicine or evacuation ships. We brought something better." The transmission shifted to show the fleet arrayed behind her, weapons powered and ready. "We brought an end." High Counselor Theric stood frozen before the observation window, his blue skin pale with shock. Around him, the other council members had fallen silent. No one moved, no one spoke. They simply stared at the sky, where the impossible had become real. The human fleet filled the heavens like a constellation of death. Ships of every size and shape moved through the void, their lights blinking in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. And at the center of it all, the dreadnoughts waited like sleeping giants, their massive forms blocking out the stars behind them. "This is not what we asked for," Elder Somira whispered. Her voice was barely audible. "We asked for medicine. We asked for evacuation ships. We asked for help. This is not help. This is war." Theric said nothing. He could not find the words. In all his years as a leader, he had never seen anything like this. The Valorians had always believed that violence was the failure of civilization. They had taught their children that words could solve any problem, that understanding could bridge any gap, that peace was always possible if you were willing to work for it. But the humans had not brought words. They had brought fire. A communication request appeared on his personal device. The identifier marked it as coming from the flagship of the human fleet, the UES Righteous Fury. Theric accepted the request with shaking hands. Admiral Victoria Chen appeared on the screen. She was sitting in what appeared to be a command chair, surrounded by displays showing tactical information. Her gray eyes looked directly into the camera, directly into Theric's soul. "High Counselor," she said. Her voice was calm and professional. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance. I understand this may not be what you expected." Theric found his voice. "Admiral Chen, we are grateful for any assistance you can provide, but we must express our concern. We did not request military intervention. We asked only for humanitarian aid. We are a peaceful people. We do not believe in violence as a solution to conflict." Victoria nodded slowly. "I understand your position, High Counselor, and I respect it. The Valorian commitment to peace is one of the things we admire most about your culture. You have built a beautiful civilization, one that values life and understanding above all else." She leaned forward slightly. "But I must be honest with you. The Dominion of Endless Night does not share your values. They do not want peace. They do not want understanding. They want your complete submission or your complete destruction. There is no middle ground with them. There is no negotiation. There is no compromise." Theric shook his head. "Perhaps if we could just speak with them. Perhaps if we could understand what they truly want." "They want you to be slaves," Victoria interrupted. Her voice was still calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. "That is what they want. They have conquered 40 species over the last 1,000 years. Some of those species no longer exist because they chose death over slavery. The ones that survive live in conditions that I will not describe to you, because the description alone would cause you pain." She stood and walked closer to the camera. "High Counselor, I have seen the intelligence reports. I know what the Dominion does to the species they conquer. I know what fate awaits your people if they are not stopped, and I will not stand by and watch it happen. Not to you, not to anyone." Theric felt tears forming in his large eyes. "But we are a peaceful people. We have no army. We have no weapons. How can we be part of a war?" Victoria's expression softened. "You do not need to be part of it. That is why we are here. Humanity will fight this battle for you. All we ask is that you stay safe, protect your civilians, and trust us to do what needs to be done." "And what needs to be done?" Victoria did not answer immediately. She turned to look at something off-screen, and when she turned back, her expression had hardened again. "We are going to destroy the Dominion fleet," she said simply. "Every ship, Every weapon, everything they brought to this system will be reduced to dust, and then we are going to follow them back to their territory and make sure they never threaten anyone again." Theric sat down heavily, his legs no longer able to support him. "You are talking about genocide." "No," Victoria said. "I am talking about justice. The Dominion has murdered millions of your people. They have destroyed your colonies without warning, without cause, without mercy. They are not victims, they are not misunderstood, they are monsters, and monsters must be stopped." She paused. "But I give you my word, High Counselor, we will not harm civilians. We will not destroy their homeworld. We will not become the very thing we are fighting against. We will be precise, we will be measured, and when it is over, the Dominion will no longer have the ability to hurt anyone ever again." Theric closed his eyes. Everything he had ever believed, everything his culture had taught him, screamed that this was wrong. Violence could not be the answer. There had to be another way. But when he thought of the burning colonies, of the millions of dead, of the children who would never grow up and the families that had been erased in an instant, he felt something stirring inside him, something dark and ancient, something that even the peaceful Valorians could not entirely suppress. "Anger. Do what you must," he whispered. "We will not interfere." Victoria nodded. "Thank you, High Counselor. I promise you, this will end, and when it does, your people will be safe." The transmission ended. Theric sat alone in the council chamber, surrounded by silence and shadow. Outside, the human fleet continued to assemble, their weapons charging, their crews preparing for battle. The war had begun. Far away, at the edge of the Valorian system, the Dominion fleet detected the new arrivals. Supreme Commander Vorthan stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Darkness, and watched the sensor displays with growing irritation. Vorthan was a massive creature, standing nearly 3 meters tall. His body was covered in armor-like plates of bone that had evolved over millions of years to protect his vital organs. His eyes were red and multifaceted, like those of an insect, giving him a near-complete field of vision. His arms ended in claws that could rend metal as easily as flesh. The Dominion were ancient. They had ruled the galactic core for longer than most species had existed. They had seen civilizations rise and fall like waves on a shore. They had conquered empires that once stretched across thousands of star systems. Nothing surprised them anymore. Nothing challenged them. But this fleet was unexpected. "Analysis," Vorthan demanded. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. The tactical officer, a smaller member of the species whose sole purpose was to process information, responded quickly. "The approaching vessels are of human origin, approximately 400 combat ships of various classes, and 12 capital ships of unprecedented size." Vorthan made a sound that might have been laughter. "Humans, the soft ones from the outer rim. I have heard of them. They are young and foolish, with more courage than sense. They are also heavily armed," the tactical officer noted. "Our preliminary scans indicate weapon systems that are significantly more powerful than standard for this region of space." Vorthan waved a claw dismissively. "Numbers and weapons mean nothing without the will to use them. These humans are friends with the Valorians. They share their weakness, their pathetic attachment to peace and life. They will hesitate. They will negotiate. They will try to find a peaceful solution while we destroy them." He turned to his communications officer. "Send a message to their fleet. Inform them that this system is now under Dominion control. They have one opportunity to retreat. If they choose to stay, they will be destroyed, along with the Valorians." The message was sent. Vorthan waited, confident in the response he would receive. Every species they had encountered reacted the same way. First, they would express outrage. Then, they would try to negotiate. Then, they would offer tribute. And finally, when all other options had failed, they would either surrender or die fighting a hopeless battle. The response came quickly, but it was not what Vorthan expected. Admiral Victoria Chen appeared on his screen. She was seated comfortably in her command chair, and she was smiling. Not the nervous smile of a frightened commander, not the forced smile of a diplomat trying to buy time. It was the genuine smile of someone who was exactly where they wanted to be. "Supreme Commander Vorthan," she said, "thank you for your message. I appreciate you taking the time to communicate before the battle begins. It gives me an opportunity to make a few things clear." Vorthan leaned forward. This was not how conversations with inferior species usually went. You have received our terms. You have one chance to flee. Take it. Victoria's smile widened. With respect, Supreme Commander, I must decline your generous offer. We came a very long way to be here, and it would be rude to leave before we've finished our business. Your business, Vorthan repeated. And what exactly is your business here, human? To kill you. Victoria said simply. You and every ship in your fleet. You have murdered millions of innocent Valorians. You have destroyed their homes, their cities, their families. You have brought nothing but death and suffering to a people who never did you any harm. She stood up from her chair and walked toward the camera. I am here to make sure you never do it again. Not to the Valorians, not to anyone. Vorthan felt a flicker of something he had not experienced in centuries. Uncertainty. This human showed no fear. She did not negotiate. She did not try to buy time. She simply stated her intention to destroy him as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. You are brave, he admitted. But bravery alone will not save you. The Dominion has conquered 40 species. We have destroyed civilizations that were ancient when your people were still crawling in the mud. What makes you think you can defeat us? Victoria nodded, as if she had been expecting this question. You are right that you have conquered many species. You are right that you have destroyed many civilizations, but you have never fought humans before. She paused. You have studied us, I am sure. You know our history. You know about our wars, our conflicts, our endless capacity for violence. But reports and statistics cannot capture what we truly are. They cannot explain why. For all our weakness, we have never been conquered. They cannot explain why every empire that has tried to break us has instead been broken. Vorthan waited, curious despite himself. It is because we do not know how to give up, Victoria continued. Other species, when faced with impossible odds, accept their fate. They surrender. They adapt. They survive as best they can. But humans are different. When we are pushed to the wall, when everything seems lost, when the darkness closes in around us, something inside us catches fire. Her eyes seem to glow with an inner light. We do not accept defeat. We do not bow to tyrants. We do not go quietly into the night. We fight. We rage. We burn everything around us if we have to, including ourselves, because dying on our feet is infinitely preferable to living on our knees. She smiled again, and this time there was no warmth in it. You have awakened that fire, Supreme Commander. You have threatened our friends. You have killed innocents under our protection. And now, you will learn what happens when humanity goes to war. The transmission ended. Vorthan stood motionless for a long moment, processing what he had just witnessed. Then he turned to his fleet command and gave the order to attack. The Dominion fleet moved like a wave of darkness across the void. 300 ships, battle-hardened veterans of 1,000 conquests, surged forward toward the human position. They were confident. They were experienced. They knew exactly how to break an enemy. The human fleet did not move to meet them. The ships simply waited, their weapons charged, their shields active. The dreadnoughts floated at the center of the formation, like mountains in a sea of steel. Commander Hassan, the tactical officer aboard the Righteous Fury, watched the approaching enemy with professional interest. They are coming in a standard attack formation, he reported. Cruisers in the front, capital ships in the center, support vessels protecting the flanks. They expect us to meet them head-on. Victoria nodded. They expect us to fight like the species they have conquered before. Defensive, cautious, trying to minimize losses. What are we going to do instead? Victoria turned to look at him. We are going to show them what happens when you make humans angry. She raised her hand and spoke clearly into the fleet communication system. All dreadnoughts, this is Admiral Chen. Execute maneuver Burning Sky. I repeat, Burning Sky. Across the fleet, captains and crew who had trained for years for this moment sprang into action. The dreadnoughts began to move, their massive engines flaring with power that turned the space around them into a sea of light. They did not form a defensive line. They did not prepare to absorb the enemy assault. They charged. The dreadnought Hammer of God led the way, its weapon systems activating in a sequence that lit up the void like a new sun being born. Beam weapons that could cut through planets sliced through the darkness. Missiles that carried warheads capable of cracking moons streaked toward the enemy formation. Kinetic rounds accelerated to fractions of light speed tore through the vacuum like the fists of an angry god. The first line of Dominion cruisers never knew what hit them. One moment they were advancing confidently toward their prey. The next, they were expanding clouds of debris and plasma, their crews dead before they could even understand what was happening. Vorthan watched in disbelief as his forward fleet evaporated. "Impossible," he whispered. "This is impossible." But it was not impossible. It was simply human. The dreadnoughts crashed into the Dominion formation like hammers striking glass. They did not fight with precision or caution. They fought with the fury of a species that had been pushed too far, that had seen too much death, that had finally found an enemy worthy of their rage. The endless defiance targeted a Dominion battleship 3 times its size and simply drove straight through it, its reinforced hull crumpling the enemy vessel like paper. The last sunrise unleashed a barrage of nuclear fire that turned a squadron of enemy destroyers into a brief second sun. The righteous fury methodically destroyed everything in its path, its weapons never stopping, its shields shrugging off attacks that would have vaporized lesser ships, and still the human fleet advanced. On the surface of Valora, the people watched the battle unfold in the night sky. Flashes of light bloomed like flowers in the darkness. Ships died in bursts of fire that outshone the stars, and through it all, the human dreadnoughts carved a path of destruction through the enemy fleet. High Counselor Therix stood at his observation window, tears streaming down his face. He had never wanted this. He had never asked for blood and death to be spilled in his people's name, but as he watched the humans fight, as he saw them throw themselves into battle without hesitation, without fear, without any thought for their own safety, he understood something he had never understood before. This was love, not the gentle, peaceful love that Valorians expressed through art and kindness. This was a fierce, burning love that would stop at nothing to protect what it cherished. The humans were not fighting because they wanted to. They were not fighting because they enjoyed violence. They were fighting because they could not stand by and watch innocent people die. They were fighting because they cared. Somewhere deep inside Therix, in a place he had never acknowledged before, something shifted. He still believed in peace. He still believed that violence was a failure. But he was beginning to understand that sometimes, when faced with absolute evil, failure was the only option. Sometimes, you had to fight. In space, the battle continued to rage. The Dominion had recovered from their initial shock and were now fighting back with everything they had. Their weapons were powerful, their ships were resilient, and their crews were experienced. They had conquered 40 species, and they were not going to fall to these upstart humans without a struggle. But the humans were relentless. For every human ship that fell, 10 Dominion vessels were destroyed. The dreadnoughts absorbed punishment that would have destroyed ordinary ships and kept fighting. Human pilots pushed their fighters beyond their limits, performing maneuvers that should have been impossible. Human soldiers prepared for boarding actions, ready to take the fight to the enemy in person if necessary. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Righteous Fury, watching the battle unfold around her. Her ship shook with each impact, but she showed no fear. She had known, when she gave the order to attack, that some of her people would die. She had accepted that weight. She would carry their memories for the rest of her life, but she would not let their sacrifice be in vain. "Status report," she demanded. Commander Hassan checked his displays. "We have destroyed approximately 150 enemy vessels. Our losses are 37 ships, including 2 cruisers and a destroyer. All 12 dreadnoughts are operational, though several have taken significant damage." Victoria nodded. "And the enemy command ship, still in the rear of their formation, protected by their remaining capital ships. Supreme Commander Vorthan has not yet committed to the battle personally." Victoria smiled. "He is waiting to see which way the battle goes before risking himself." Typical. She turned to her navigation officer. "Set a course for the eternal darkness. All dreadnoughts, follow my lead. We are going to end this war here and now." The dreadnoughts turned as one and began to push through the enemy fleet toward their ultimate target. Ships fell around them like leaves in a storm. The void was filled with fire and death. But the humans did not stop. They did not hesitate. They did not turn back. They had come to burn the heavens for an answer, and the heavens would burn. The eternal darkness shuddered as another explosion rocked the space around it. Supreme Commander Vorthan gripped his command throne with claws that dug deep furrows into the metal. Through the massive view screen that dominated the bridge, he watched his fleet die. 200 years. That was how long Vorthan had served as a commander of the Dominion. In that time, he had conquered 18 species. He had broken empires. He had watched worlds burn at his command. Never once had he experienced anything like this. The humans were not fighting like a sane species should fight. They were not conserving their forces. They were not protecting their flanks. They were not even trying to minimize their own casualties. They simply attacked, again and again, throwing themselves against his fleet with an intensity that bordered on madness. "Status report," he demanded. The tactical officer's voice trembled. "We have lost 180 vessels, Supreme Commander. That is more than half our fleet. Our remaining ships are scattered and disorganized. The enemy dreadnoughts are cutting through our formation at will." Vorthan rose from his throne and walked to the view screen. In the distance, he could see the human flagship approaching. The Righteous Fury lived up to its name. Its hull was scarred with battle damage, but its weapons still blazed with deadly light. Around it, the other dreadnoughts moved like predators surrounding their prey. "How is this possible?" Vorthan murmured. "We are the Dominion. We have conquered half the galaxy. We do not lose." No one answered him. There was no answer to give. Aboard the Righteous Fury, Admiral Victoria Chen allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. The battle was going well. Better than well, in fact. The Dominion fleet was in disarray, their ships scattered and demoralized. Victory was within reach, but it had come at a cost. She looked at the casualty reports scrolling across her personal display. 42 ships lost. 12,000 human lives extinguished in the cold void of space. Each name, each ship, each death, weighed on her soul like a stone. These were her people. She had sent them into battle. She had known some of them would not return. Command was a burden that never got lighter. "Admiral," Commander Hassan reported, "the enemy flagship is directly ahead. They have formed a defensive perimeter with their remaining capital ships. But our dreadnoughts can break through." Victoria nodded. "Order all dreadnoughts to converge on the eternal darkness. We end this now." The order went out. Across the battlefield, the 12 dreadnoughts turned toward their final target. They had taken damage, some of them severe. The Hammer of God was venting atmosphere from a breach in its lower decks. The last sunrise had lost 3 of its main weapon batteries. The Endless Defiance was running on backup power, but they were still fighting. They would keep fighting until the battle was won, or until every last one of them was destroyed. That was the human way. On the surface of Valora, the entire population had stopped to watch the battle unfold. Every screen, every holographic display, every communication device was tuned to the fighting above. Valorians gathered in the streets, in their homes, in the underground shelters where they had hidden from the Dominion attacks. They watched as ships exploded like fireworks against the night sky. They watched as the human dreadnoughts carved through the enemy fleet, like knives through water. They watched as their protectors gave everything they had to save a species they barely knew. High Counselor Therex stood in the Great Hall of Unity, surrounded by the other members of the Council. No one spoke. Words seemed inadequate in the face of what they were witnessing. Elder Samira finally broke the silence. "They are dying for us," she said. Her voice was thick with emotion. "Those humans up there, they are dying for us. Why? We gave them nothing. We had no alliance, no treaty, no promise of aid. We were just trading partners. Why would they sacrifice so much for strangers?" Therex thought about the question for a long moment before answering. "I have been reading about human history," he said slowly. "In the days before they took to the stars, they were divided into many different nations and cultures. They fought wars with each other, terrible wars that killed millions. By any logical measure, they should have destroyed themselves long before they ever left their homeworld." He turned to face the Council. But they did not destroy themselves. Instead, they learned. They grew. They came to understand that their greatest strength was not their technology or their weapons. It was their ability to care for others, even others who were different from them. He gestured toward the sky. Humans have a concept they call empathy. It is the ability to feel what others feel, to understand their pain and their joy as if it were your own. This empathy is what drives them to fight. Not hatred, not greed, not the desire for power. They fight because they cannot stand to see others suffer. Samira shook her head. "That is beautiful, but it is also terrifying. How do we live in a universe where such violence is necessary to protect the innocent?" Therex had no answer for that. He was still wrestling with the same question himself. In space, the final battle had begun. The eternal darkness was surrounded by the last remnants of the Dominion fleet. 20 capital ships, each one a veteran of countless battles, had formed a protective ring around their flagship. They knew they were fighting for their lives. They knew that if the human dreadnoughts reached Supreme Commander Vorthan, the war would be over. Admiral Chen studied the enemy formation with calculating eyes. The Dominion commanders were not fools. They had positioned their ships to provide overlapping fields of fire, making any approach costly. Even the dreadnoughts would take significant damage trying to break through. We could call for a bombardment, Commander Hassan suggested. Use our remaining missile reserves to soften their defenses before we engage. Victoria considered the option. It was tactically sound, but it would take time. Time that would cost more human lives as the battle continued elsewhere. Time that would give the Dominion more chances to organize a counterattack. No, this had to end now. Negative, she said. We go in directly. Order all dreadnoughts to form spearhead formation. The righteous fury will take point. Hassan hesitated. Admiral, with respect, that means we will absorb the majority of the enemy fire. Our shields are already at 60%. We may not survive the approach. Victoria met his eyes with a steady gaze. Then we do not survive. But we take Vorthan with us. There was no argument. Hassan simply nodded and transmitted the orders. The dreadnoughts began to move. They formed a wedge pattern with the righteous fury at the tip. Its massive hull pointed directly at the enemy flagship. Behind it, the other 11 dreadnoughts positioned themselves to protect the flanks and add their firepower to the assault. Vorthan watched them come. For the first time in 200 years, he felt fear. Not fear of death. The Dominion did not fear death. They embraced it as the final test of a warrior. What he feared was something worse. He feared failure. If he fell here, if the Dominion fleet was destroyed, his species would never recover from the shame. They had ruled the galaxy through terror and strength. Once that strength was shown to be breakable, once their enemies learned that they could be defeated, the entire edifice of Dominion power would crumble. All ships, he broadcast to his remaining fleet. Concentrate fire on the lead vessel. Destroy it at all costs. The others will scatter if their flagship falls. It was a reasonable assumption. Most species would break and run if their leader was killed. But Vorthan was about to learn that humans were not most species. The Dominion ships opened fire. Beams of destructive energy lanced toward the righteous fury. Missiles streaked across the void. Kinetic rounds hammered against the dreadnought's shields. The shields held. For a moment. Then another. The dreadnought's engineers worked frantically, redirecting power, reinforcing weak points, doing everything in their power to keep the ship alive. Victoria stood at the center of the bridge, unmoving as the ship shook around her. Officers shouted status reports. Warning alarms blared. Somewhere in the lower decks, a secondary explosion sent a tremor through the entire vessel. Shield strength at 40%, Hassan reported. 35. 30. Victoria did not respond. Her eyes were fixed on the enemy flagship, growing larger in the view screen with every passing second. 25%. 20. Admiral, we need to fire everything, Victoria said quietly. The righteous fury unleashed its full arsenal. Every weapon on the ship, every missile tube, every beam projector, every kinetic launcher fired at once. The amount of destructive energy that left the dreadnought's hull in that single moment was enough to crack a small moon. The Dominion capital ships in the Fury's path simply ceased to exist. They did not explode in a dramatic fashion. They did not have time to take evasive action. One moment they were there, and the next, they were clouds of subatomic particles spreading through the void. The other dreadnoughts followed suit, each one choosing a target and eliminating it with overwhelming force. The hammer of God crushed a battleship between two converging shots from its main guns. The last sunrise lived up to its name by converting an enemy cruiser into a brief star. The endless Defiance rammed straight through a destroyer, its reinforced hull barely noticing the impact. In less than 3 minutes, the protective ring around the eternal darkness had been shattered. Only the flagship remained, floating alone in a sea of debris. Vorthan stared at the destruction around him. His entire fleet, the pride of the Dominion, reduced to scrap metal and corpses. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. And yet, it had happened. The righteous fury, battered and bleeding but still very much alive, positioned itself directly in front of his ship. Its weapons were aimed at his bridge. At him, a communication request came through. Vorthan accepted it, though he already knew what he would see. Admiral Victoria Chen appeared on his screen. She was covered in dust, and there was blood on her forehead from a wound she had not bothered to treat. Behind her, her bridge crew was working frantically to keep the damaged ship operational, but she was smiling. "Supreme Commander Vorthan," she said, "I believe we have some unfinished business." Vorthan drew himself up to his full height. Even in defeat, he would not show weakness. "You have won this battle, human. But the Dominion has thousands of ships, millions of soldiers. You cannot hope to defeat us all." "Perhaps not," Victoria agreed. "But I do not need to defeat you all. I only need to defeat you." She gestured, and the weapons of the righteous fury began to power up for a final shot. "This is your last chance, Supreme Commander. Surrender your ship. Order your remaining forces to stand down. Submit to human justice for the crimes you have committed against the Valorians." Vorthan laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. "Surrender? You want me to surrender? Do you have any idea what the Dominion does to commanders who surrender? Death would be a mercy compared to what my masters would inflict upon me." Victoria's expression did not change. "Then you have a choice. Die here, as a war criminal who murdered millions of innocents, or die trying to fight your way free. Either way, you will not leave this system alive." Vorthan considered his options. There were no good ones. His ship was damaged but still functional. His weapons were online. He could try to fight his way past the human fleet, but the odds were nearly impossible. Or he could accept defeat and face whatever punishment the humans chose to inflict. Neither option appealed to him. So he chose a third path. "There is another possibility," he said slowly. "A duel. Single combat between champions. If your warrior defeats mine, I will surrender unconditionally. If mine defeats yours, you will withdraw your fleet and allow me to leave." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "You want to settle this with a personal fight? It is an ancient tradition among my people. A way to resolve conflicts without further bloodshed. Surely, with your species' famous love of combat, you cannot refuse such a challenge." Victoria was silent for a long moment. Around her, her crew exchanged uncertain glances. This was not standard procedure. This was not how modern wars were supposed to be fought. But Victoria was not thinking about procedure. She was thinking about the 12,000 humans who had died today. She was thinking about the millions of Valorians who had died over the past months. She was thinking about all the blood that had been spilled, all the lives that had been destroyed, and she was thinking about how much she wanted to see this monster brought to justice with her own eyes. "I accept your challenge," she said, "but I will be my own champion." The crew gasped. Hassan stepped forward. "Admiral, with respect, this is madness. You cannot risk yourself in personal combat. We need you to lead the fleet." Victoria turned to face him. "If I fall, you will take command. You will complete the mission. You will protect the Valorians. That is an order." Hassan wanted to argue, but he knew that look in her eyes. There would be no changing her mind. "Yes, Admiral," he said quietly. Victoria returned her attention to the screen. "1 hour, Supreme Commander. My shuttle will dock with your ship. We will settle this face to face." Vorthan's multifaceted eyes glittered with anticipation. "I look forward to it, human. I have never killed one of your kind with my own hands. It will be an educational experience." The transmission ended. Victoria turned and walked off the bridge, heading for the shuttle bay. Behind her, her crew watched in silence, wondering if they would ever see their admiral again. On the surface of Valora, High Counselor Therix received word of what was about to happen. He stood before the council, his face pale with shock. "She cannot do this," he said. "The admiral cannot risk her life in personal combat. She is too important. The fleet needs her." Elder Somira shook her head. "You do not understand humans, Therix. This Admiral Chen, she is not just a leader. She is a symbol. She represents everything her people stand for. Their courage, their honor, their willingness to sacrifice everything for what they believe in." She looked up at the sky, where the battle debris still glittered against the stars. "If she fights and wins, it will not just be a military victory. It will be a statement, a declaration that humanity will not be threatened, will not be intimidated, will not be turned aside by any force in the universe." Therix sat down heavily. "And if she loses?" Somira was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but certain. Then she will have died as she lived, fighting for what is right, fighting for those who cannot fight for themselves. She smiled sadly. I think, perhaps, there are worse ways to meet your end. In space, a single shuttle detached from the righteous fury and began its journey toward the eternal darkness. Inside, Admiral Victoria Chen sat alone, preparing herself for what was to come. She was 60 years old. Her body was not what it had once been. The Dominion commander was younger, stronger, and equipped with natural weapons that could tear through metal. By any rational measure, she should not be doing this. But Victoria had not survived 60 years in the military by being rational. She had survived by being stubborn, by being clever, and by never, ever, giving up. She checked her weapons. A plasma pistol, standard military issue. A combat knife, passed down from her grandfather, and her powered armor, a suit of technology that enhanced her strength and speed to superhuman levels. The Dominion had natural weapons. Humanity had something better. They had the ability to build tools that made natural weapons obsolete. The shuttle docked with the eternal darkness. Victoria took a deep breath, said a silent prayer to whatever gods might be listening, and stepped through the airlock. The battle for the fate of Valora was about to enter its final phase. The corridors of the eternal darkness were dark and cold. Victoria Chen moved through them with careful steps, her powered armor humming softly as it amplified her senses. Every shadow could hide an enemy. Every doorway could be an ambush, but she encountered no one. The ship seemed empty, abandoned by its crew. Perhaps Vorthan had ordered them to evacuate. Perhaps they were simply hiding, unwilling to face the human who had destroyed their fleet. She followed the directions that had been transmitted to her shuttle. The dueling chamber was located in the heart of the ship, a massive circular room that had been used for similar challenges throughout Dominion history. When she finally reached it, she found Vorthan waiting for her. The Supreme Commander stood at the center of the chamber, his massive form lit by harsh overhead lights. Without his command throne, without the displays and officers surrounding him, he seemed even larger and more dangerous. His armor-like skin gleamed like polished obsidian. His claws clicked against the metal floor as he shifted his weight. You came alone, he observed. His voice echoed in the empty chamber. I had expected you to bring guards, witnesses, some form of protection. Victoria stepped into the chamber, the door sliding shut behind her. I am my own protection. Vorthan made a sound that might have been amusement. Brave words for a soft creature. Tell me, human, have you ever killed with your own hands? Have you ever felt the life drain from another being while your claws were buried in their flesh? I have fought in close combat before, Victoria replied. She kept her voice steady, showing no fear. I have killed when necessary. It is not something I take pleasure in, but it is something I am capable of. Pleasure, Vorthan repeated. He began to circle her, his multifaceted eyes never leaving her form. You speak of killing as if it were a distasteful duty, a chore to be completed and forgotten. That is the difference between your species and mine. We understand that death is the ultimate expression of power. When you kill, you prove your superiority over your victim. You demonstrate that you have the right to exist while they do not. Victoria turned slowly, keeping him in sight. And how many have you killed to prove your superiority, Supreme Commander? How many innocents have died screaming while you demonstrated your right to exist? Millions, Vorthan said without hesitation. Perhaps billions, if you count all the species the Dominion has conquered during my lifetime. And I feel no regret for any of them. They were weak. They were prey. They existed only to serve the strong. He lunged forward suddenly, his claws slashing toward her throat. Victoria had been expecting the attack. Her armor's systems responded instantly, boosting her reflexes to superhuman levels. She dodged to the side and brought her combat knife up in a counterstrike. The blade scraped across Vorthan's armored hide, leaving a thin white line but drawing no blood. He laughed and pressed his attack, forcing her back with a series of vicious swipes. Your armor is impressive, he admitted. It makes you faster than you should be, stronger than you should be. But it cannot change what you are. Underneath all that technology, you are still just a soft, fragile creature, playing at being a warrior. Victoria did not waste breath on a response. She focused on the fight, looking for weaknesses in his defense. Vorthan was powerful, but he was also arrogant. He attacked with broad, sweeping movements designed to overwhelm rather than outmaneuver. Against a slower opponent, these attacks would have been devastating. Against her enhanced reflexes, they were almost predictable. She ducked under a horizontal slash and drove her knife into the joint between two of his armor plates. This time, the blade found purchase. Vorthan roared in pain and lashed out with his other arm, catching her across the chest and sending her flying. She hit the wall hard. Even with the armor absorbing most of the impact, the breath was knocked from her lungs. She forced herself to roll aside as Vorthan charged, his claws tearing gouges in the metal where she had been lying. First blood, she gasped, climbing back to her feet. How does it feel, Supreme Commander? When was the last time someone actually hurt you? Vorthan looked down at the thin trickle of dark fluid seeping from his wound. His eyes narrowed with sudden rage. You think this makes you special? You think one lucky strike changes anything? I have survived wounds that would kill 10 of your kind. I have fought through pain that would drive you mad. He attacked again, but this time his movements were faster, more controlled. He had stopped underestimating her. The arrogance was being replaced by focused fury. Victoria found herself driven back, barely able to block or dodge his attacks. Her armor's power reserves were dropping as the systems worked overtime to keep her alive. She needed to end this soon, or she would not end it at all. She made a decision. It was risky, possibly suicidal, but she saw no other option. She allowed his next attack to connect. His claws raked across her armored chest, tearing through the outer layer and sending sparks flying. The impact drove her to her knees. She felt pain blossom in her ribs, sharp and insistent, but as he leaned in for the killing blow, she drew her plasma pistol and fired directly into his face. The shot caught him in one of his multifaceted eyes. The eye exploded in a burst of fluid and shattered chitin. Vorthan screamed, a sound unlike anything Victoria had ever heard. It was the scream of a creature that had never known true pain. Suddenly experiencing it for the first time, he stumbled backward, claws pressed to his ruined eye. Victoria did not hesitate. She pushed herself up and charged, driving her knife into his throat with all the strength her armor could provide. The blade sank deep. Dark blood fountained out, splashing across her visor. Vorthan tried to speak, but only a wet gurgling sound came out. His massive body swayed for a moment, then collapsed to the floor like a falling tree. Victoria stood over him, breathing hard. Her ribs burned with every breath. Her armor was damaged, systems flickering in and out. But she was alive, and he was dying. This, she said quietly, is for the Valorians. For every innocent life you took. For every family you destroyed. For every child who will never know what happened to their parents. Vorthan's remaining eye focused on her. For a moment, she thought she saw something there. Fear, perhaps, or regret, or simply the cold realization that everything he had believed about strength and power was wrong. Then the light faded from his eye, and Supreme Commander Vorthan of the Dominion was dead. Victoria activated her communication system. Her voice was rough, tired, but strong. This is Admiral Chen. Vorthan is down. I repeat, Vorthan is down. All Dominion forces are to surrender immediately or be destroyed. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, one by one, the remaining Dominion ships began transmitting surrender signals. Their weapons powered down. Their shields dropped. The war was over. Aboard the Righteous Fury, Commander Hassan received the news with a mixture of relief and disbelief. She did it, he breathed. The Admiral actually did it. Around him, the bridge crew erupted in cheers. Officers who had maintained discipline throughout the battle finally allowed themselves to celebrate. They had won. They had protected the Valorians. They had destroyed a fleet that had conquered 40 species. They had proven, once again, that humanity would not be defeated. On the surface of Valora, the news spread like wildfire. In the streets of Serath, Valorians who had been hiding emerged to look up at the sky. They saw the Dominion ships floating motionless, their weapons dark and silent. They saw the human dreadnoughts moving among them, accepting surrenders and securing prisoners. They saw that they were safe. High Counselor Theric stood before the window of the Great Hall, watching the sunrise. The twin suns of Valora painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, just as they had done for 10,000 years. But for the first time in months, he watched them with hope rather than fear. The humans had come. The humans had fought. The humans had won. And now, Everything was going to change. A communication request came through. Therex accepted it, and Admiral Victoria Chen appeared on his screen. She looked exhausted. There were bandages visible on her forehead and neck, and she moved stiffly, suggesting injuries that had not yet fully healed. But her gray eyes still held that strange fire that Therex had come to associate with humanity. "High Counselor," she said, "I wanted to inform you personally that the Dominion threat has been neutralized. Supreme Commander Vorthan is dead, and his remaining forces have surrendered." Therex bowed his head. "Admiral Chen, I do not have words sufficient to express my gratitude. You have saved my people. You have saved our entire civilization. We can never repay this debt." Victoria shook her head. "There is no debt. You are our friends. When friends are in trouble, you help them. It is that simple. But so many of your people died. 12,000 humans gave their lives for a species they had never even met. How do you justify such a sacrifice?" Victoria was silent for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but certain. "When I was young, my grandmother used to tell me stories about the old wars on Earth, wars where humans fought humans, where millions died for causes that seemed important at the time but are barely remembered now." She paused. "She used to say that the only wars worth fighting are the ones where you are protecting someone who cannot protect themselves. She said that courage is not about being unafraid, it is about being afraid and fighting anyway, because something matters more than your fear." She looked directly at the screen, at Therex, at the symbol of everything the Valorians represented. "Your people matter, High Counselor. Your culture, your art, your kindness, your peaceful ways, these things matter. They make the universe a better place. And so, when they were threatened, we came. Because that is what humans do." Therex felt tears forming in his large eyes. He had spent his entire life believing that peace was the ultimate virtue, that violence could never be justified. And in a sense, he still believed that. Violence was terrible. War was terrible. The deaths of those 12,000 humans were terrible. But he also understood, for the first time, that sometimes terrible things were necessary to prevent even more terrible things. Sometimes, you had to fight to protect what you loved. Sometimes, peace could only be preserved through sacrifice. "What happens now?" he asked. Victoria's expression hardened slightly. "Now, we ensure this never happens again. The Dominion may have thousands of ships and millions of soldiers, as Vorthan claimed, but they just watched their most powerful fleet be destroyed by a species they considered soft and weak. They just lost their most decorated commander in single combat. They are going to think very carefully before threatening anyone under human protection ever again." She paused. "I am also going to recommend that the United Human Government establish a formal defensive alliance with Valora. We will station ships in your system, provide training and technology if you desire it, and make it absolutely clear to the rest of the galaxy that an attack on Valora is an attack on humanity." Therex nodded slowly. "I must discuss this with my council. Such an alliance would represent a significant change in our foreign policy. Some will argue that we are becoming dependent on human military power. You probably are," Victoria admitted. "But consider the alternative. Without our protection, you would be vulnerable to any species that decided to follow the Dominion's example. The galaxy is not a safe place, High Counselor. I wish it were otherwise, but I have learned that wishing does not change reality." She leaned forward. "You do not have to become warriors. You do not have to abandon your peaceful ways. You can continue to create art and heal the sick and build your beautiful cities. All we ask is that you allow us to stand guard at your door. Let us be the shield that protects you. Let us be the sword that strikes your enemies." Therex looked out the window at his city, at the towers and gardens and floating platforms that represented 10,000 years of peaceful civilization. The Valorians had built something beautiful, something worth protecting, and maybe, just maybe, accepting protection did not make them weak. Maybe it made them wise. "I will speak to my council," he said, "but I believe they will agree. We have seen what happens when we try to face the darkness alone. We nearly died. If humanity is willing to help us, we would be foolish to refuse." Victoria smiled. It was a tired smile, the smile of a woman who had fought too many battles and seen too many friends die. But it was genuine. "Then we are agreed. Welcome to the human family, High Counselor. We look forward to protecting you for as long as we are needed." The transmission ended. Therex stood alone in the great hall, thinking about everything that had happened. 3 months ago, his greatest concern had been a trade dispute with a neighboring system. Now, his entire worldview had been shattered and rebuilt. He had learned that peace was precious, but fragile. He had learned that kindness was beautiful, but not always enough. He had learned that there were species in the universe who saw gentleness as weakness and would exploit it without mercy. And he had learned that there were also species who saw gentleness as something worth protecting. Species who would cross the galaxy and burn the heavens to defend strangers they had never met. The universe was vast and dark and full of terrors. But somewhere in that darkness, there were lights. Small lights, fragile lights, but lights nonetheless. Lights that refused to go out no matter how hard the darkness pressed against them. Humanity was one of those lights. And now, thanks to their sacrifice, Valora would continue to shine as well. Therex turned away from the window and went to address his council. There was much to discuss, much to decide, much to rebuild, but for the first time in months, he felt something he had almost forgotten how to feel: hope. In the space above Valora, the human fleet began the long process of securing the system. Dominion prisoners were transferred to secure facilities. Damaged ships were repaired or towed to safe harbors. The debris of battle was collected and catalogued. Admiral Victoria Chen watched it all from the bridge of the Righteous Fury. Her injuries had been treated, but she had refused to leave her post until the situation was stable. That was her duty as commander. That was what her people expected of her. Commander Hassan approached her carefully. "Admiral, you should get some rest. The doctors are concerned about your condition." Victoria waved a dismissive hand. "The doctors can wait. There is still work to be done." "With respect, ma'am, the work will still be here when you wake up. You have been awake for almost 70 hours. You fought in single combat against an alien warlord. You nearly died several times over the past day. If you collapse on the bridge, it will not exactly inspire confidence in the crew." Victoria opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. Hassan was right, of course. He usually was, which was why she kept him around despite his annoying habit of telling her things she did not want to hear. "Fine," she said. "You have command. Do not break my ship while I am asleep." Hassan smiled. "I would not dream of it, Admiral." Victoria walked off the bridge, her steps slow and heavy. The exhaustion she had been holding at bay finally began to overwhelm her. Every muscle ached. Every joint protested. Her body was reminding her, in no uncertain terms, that she was not a young woman anymore. But as she walked through the corridors of her ship, she saw her crew. They nodded to her, saluted her, smiled at her. These were the people who had followed her into battle. These were the people who had trusted her to lead them against impossible odds. 12,000 of their brothers and sisters had died today. That weight would never leave her. She would carry their names, their faces, their memories until the day she died. But the ones who survived would go home. They would see their families again. They would tell stories about the Battle of Valora for the rest of their lives, and they would do it because Victoria had led them to victory. That was what it meant to be a leader. That was what it meant to be human. She reached her quarters and collapsed onto her bed without bothering to remove her uniform. Within seconds, she was asleep, and for the first time in weeks, she dreamed of something other than war. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Valora. The scars were still visible in the night sky, where debris fields caught the light of the twin suns and glittered like fallen stars. But life had returned to the Valorian homeworld. The streets of Sereth were filled with people again. Children played in the gardens. Artists created new works that reflected both the trauma and the hope of their survival. High Counselor Therex stood at the observation window of the Great Hall of Unity, watching a human military transport descend through the atmosphere. The ship was bringing the final shipment of defensive installations that would be placed in orbit around Valora, part of the new alliance between humans and Valorians. It still felt strange to him, having weapons in his sky. The Valorians had never needed such things before. They had believed that their peaceful nature would protect them, that no species would want to harm those who posed no threat. They had been wrong, and that wrongness had cost them dearly. Footsteps approached behind him. Therex turned to find Elder Samira walking toward him, her blue skin showing the signs of age and recent stress. She had lost 3 grandchildren in the attacks on the outer colonies. The grief had changed her, deepened her, made her wisdom sharper and more urgent. "The human ambassador has arrived," she said. "She is waiting in the reception chamber." Therex nodded. "I will see her shortly." There is something I must do first. He walked to a small altar that had been set up in the corner of the great hall. On it stood a holographic display showing the faces of every Valorian who had died during the Dominion attacks, 2,300,000 souls. The display cycled through them continuously, ensuring that none were forgotten. Therix bowed his head and spoke the words of remembrance that Valorians had used for 10,000 years. It was a promise to those who had passed that their lives had mattered, that they would be remembered, that the living would carry forward the values they had cherished. When he finished, he turned and walked toward the reception chamber. Ambassador Sarah Mitchell was waiting for him there. Sarah was a tall woman with dark skin and gray hair pulled back in a practical style. She had been chosen for this position specifically because of her experience in post-conflict diplomacy. She had helped rebuild civilizations torn apart by war. She knew how to help the wounded heal. "High Counselor," she said, bowing her head in respect. "It is good to see you again. And you, Ambassador." Therix gestured for her to sit. "I understand you have news from the Dominion territories." Sarah's expression became serious. "Indeed. Our intelligence services have been monitoring the situation closely. The defeat at Valora has had significant effects on Dominion politics." She activated a holographic display that showed a map of the galaxy. The areas controlled by the Dominion were highlighted in red. Supreme Commander Vorthan was not just a military leader. He was a symbol of Dominion invincibility. His death, especially in single combat with a human, has shaken their entire power structure. She pointed to several locations on the map. 3 of the species they had conquered have risen in rebellion. 2 more are on the verge of open revolt. The Dominion is being forced to redirect resources from expansion to internal control. Therix studied the map. "Will they try to attack us again? To regain their lost honor?" Sarah shook her head. "We do not believe so. The Dominion operates on a simple principle. Attack the weak, avoid the strong. Before Valora, they considered humanity weak. Now they know better. Our analysts believe they will avoid any confrontation with human-protected space for at least a generation, probably longer." She smiled slightly. "We have also made it very clear that any attack on Valora will be answered with overwhelming force. We have positioned a permanent defense fleet in this system. 3 dreadnoughts are within a day's travel at all times. The Dominion knows this." Therix nodded slowly. It was still strange to him, this idea of protection through threat. The Valorians had always believed that showing strength invited aggression, that the best defense was having nothing worth attacking. But he had learned that some aggressors did not care what you had or did not have. Some aggressors simply wanted to hurt others. And against such aggressors, the only defense was the ability to hurt them back. "I have a question," he said carefully. "One that I have been hesitating to ask." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Please. I am here to help in any way I can." "Why?" Therix asked simply. "Why did humanity come to our aid? We had no formal alliance. We offered you nothing of significant value. We were simply trading partners, nothing more. Yet you sent your greatest fleet, your most powerful ships, your finest warriors. 12,000 of your people died to protect us. Why?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "That is a complicated question. Different humans might give you different answers." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Valorian sky. "Some would say it was strategic. The Dominion was a threat to the entire region. By stopping them at Valora, we prevented them from growing stronger and eventually threatening human space." She turned to face him. "Others would say it was about honor. The Valorians had been our friends for 50 years. You had treated our people with kindness and respect. To abandon you in your hour of need would have been a betrayal of everything we claimed to stand for." She paused. "But I think the truest answer is simpler than either of those. We came because we could not stand to watch innocent people die. Because somewhere deep in the human soul, there is something that refuses to accept cruelty and injustice. Because when we see monsters hurting the helpless, we feel a burning need to stop them, regardless of the cost." Therix absorbed her words. "Your species is very strange, Ambassador. You are capable of terrible violence, yet you use it to protect strangers. You are willing to die for causes that offer you no personal benefit. You defy logic at every turn." Sarah laughed softly. "You are not wrong. We often confuse ourselves as much as we confuse others, but I have come to believe that our strangeness is our greatest strength. We do not think like other species. We do not calculate costs and benefits in the same way. We simply see what is right and try to do it, even when the odds are against us. She returned to her seat. I have studied many species in my career. Some are older than humanity. Some are more technologically advanced. Some are physically stronger. But I have never encountered a species that combines our capacity for both destruction and compassion in quite the same way. It is a dangerous combination, Therex observed. Yes, Sarah agreed, but also a powerful one. Our enemies learn that we will fight to the death if pushed. Our friends learn that we will protect them at any cost. Both lessons are valuable. The conversation was interrupted by a communication from Therex's aide. Hi, Counselor. Admiral Chen's shuttle has just arrived in orbit. She is requesting permission to transport down. Therex felt a surge of emotion. Admiral Chen had returned to human space after the battle to report to her superiors and attend to the 1,000 administrative tasks that followed any military action. But she had promised to return for the memorial ceremony that was to be held today. Grant her permission, Therex said, and inform the council that the ceremony will begin in 1 hour. Sarah smiled. She insisted on coming, you know. Her doctors wanted her to rest, but she said she owed it to the fallen. Both human and Valorian. She is an extraordinary woman, Therex said. She is a human, Sarah replied, which means she is both extraordinary and ordinary at the same time. That is another thing that makes us strange. 1 hour later, the memorial garden was filled with mourners. The garden had been created in the months since the battle, a peaceful space where Valorians could come to remember the dead. Human architects had helped design it, incorporating elements from both cultures. Crystal trees stood beside human oak saplings. Valorian meditation pools reflected the light of human holographic memorial stones. Admiral Victoria Chen walked slowly through the garden, her human military uniform a stark contrast to the flowing robes of the Valorians around her. She was not wearing her powered armor today. She was not carrying weapons. She was simply a woman come to pay her respects. Beside her walked High Counselor Therex. They said nothing as they moved through the garden, past the trees and pools and stones. They did not need words. Some grief was too deep for language. They stopped before a great wall of crystal that had been erected at the center of the garden. On its surface, names were carved in light. Valorian names, human names, all mixed together, all equal in death, as they had been equal in the cause they died for. 12,000 humans. 2,300,000 Valorians. Each name a life. Each name a story that had ended too soon. Victoria reached out and touched the wall. Her fingers traced the name of a young officer who had served aboard one of the ships that had been destroyed in the battle. She had never met him personally, but she had read his file. 23 years old, fresh out of the academy, engaged to be married. He would never see his wedding day. He would never hold his children in his arms. He would never grow old with the woman he loved, and yet, because of his sacrifice, Valorian children would grow up safe. Valorian families would remain whole. Valorian civilization would continue for another 10,000 years. Was it worth it? Victoria did not know. She suspected she would never know. All she could do was honor his memory and ensure that his death had meaning. There is something I would like to say, she said quietly. If you would permit me. Therex nodded. Please. Speak freely. Victoria turned to face the assembled crowd. Valorians and humans stood side by side, united in grief and gratitude. She saw Elder Somira, her face wet with tears. She saw Commander Hassan, who had traveled from Earth to attend the ceremony. She saw hundreds of others, all waiting to hear what she would say. I am not good at speeches, she began. I am a soldier, not a poet. I know how to fight and how to lead, but I have never been skilled with words. She took a deep breath. But I will try, because the people we are here to honor deserve whatever poor tribute I can offer. She gestured at the wall of names behind her. These names represent the finest beings I have ever known. Humans who crossed the galaxy to fight for strangers. Valorians who faced annihilation with courage and dignity. Every one of them deserves to be remembered. Every one of them died so that others might live. Her voice grew stronger. There are those who would say that war is always wrong, that violence never solves anything. I used to believe that too. I used to think that if we were just peaceful enough, just kind enough, just understanding enough, we could avoid conflict entirely. She shook her head. I was wrong. The universe is not a peaceful place. There are beings out there who see kindness as weakness, who see mercy as an invitation to attack, who will never stop hurting others unless they are stopped by force. She looked at Therix. The Valorians taught me something valuable. They showed me that peace is beautiful, that art and kindness and understanding are worth protecting, that civilizations built on cooperation and love are infinitely more valuable than civilizations built on conquest and fear. She returned her gaze to the crowd. But they also taught me that peace must be protected, that beauty must be defended, that sometimes the only way to preserve what is good is to be willing to fight for it. Her voice dropped. The people we honor today understood this. They knew the cost of battle. They knew that some of them would not return, but they went anyway, because they believed that some things are worth dying for, because they knew that the alternative, standing by while innocents suffered, was worse than death. She straightened. So today, we remember them, we speak their names, we tell their stories, and we promise them, all of them, that their sacrifice was not in vain, that the peace they died for will be preserved, that the civilizations they protected will continue to grow and flourish. She saluted the wall of names. Rest easy, my friends. You have earned it. Silence fell over the garden. Then, slowly, the Valorians began to sing. It was an ancient song, one that they had used for 10,000 years to honor the dead. The melody was haunting and beautiful, filled with sorrow and hope in equal measure. The humans did not know the words, but they stood in respectful silence, adding their presence to the tribute, human and Valorian, together in grief and remembrance. When the song ended, Therix stepped forward. On behalf of all Valorians, I would like to make an announcement. From this day forward, the anniversary of the Battle of Valora will be a holiday throughout our system. It will be called Remembrance Day, and it will honor all who died in the conflict, regardless of species. He turned to Victoria. Furthermore, I am pleased to announce that the government of Valora has unanimously approved the construction of a permanent memorial to human sacrifice. It will stand in the capital city of Sereth, visible to all who visit, and it will bear an inscription that I have chosen personally. Victoria raised an eyebrow. What inscription? Therix smiled. It will say, "They expected aid. Human dreadnoughts burned the heavens for an answer." Victoria felt tears forming in her eyes. She did not try to stop them. That is a great honor, High Counselor. One we will strive to deserve. You have already deserved it, Therix replied. 1,000 times over. The ceremony continued for several more hours. Speeches were made, songs were sung, prayers were offered to whatever gods each species believed in. And throughout it all, human and Valorian stood together, united by the bonds that had been forged in fire and blood. When it was finally over, Victoria walked alone to the edge of the memorial garden. She stood looking up at the night sky, where the stars shone bright and cold. Somewhere out there, the Dominion was licking its wounds. Somewhere out there, other species were watching and learning. Somewhere out there, the universe continued its endless dance of creation and destruction. But here, on this small world, there was peace. Here, there was hope. Here, there was the beginning of something new. She heard footsteps approaching and turned to find Therix walking toward her. The High Counselor looked tired, but his eyes held a new light that had not been there 6 months ago. "May I join you?" he asked. Victoria nodded. They stood together in silence for a long moment, watching the stars. "What happens now?" Therix finally asked. "Where does humanity go from here?" Victoria considered the question. "The same place we have always been going. Forward, outward, upward. We explore, we learn, we grow, and when we find friends who need our help, we help them." She turned to look at him. "That is what it means to be human. We do not know how to stand still. We do not know how to accept limits. We see the darkness, and we light a fire. We see the void, and we build a bridge. We see the impossible, and we say, why not?" Therix shook his head slowly. "Your species continues to amaze me. After everything you have been through, after all the wars and struggles and sacrifices, you still look to the future with optimism. What is the alternative?" Victoria asked. "Despair? Surrender? Accepting that the universe is dark and cold and uncaring, and there is nothing we can do about it?" She shook her head. "That is not in our nature. We were born on a small planet in a quiet corner of the galaxy. We had no natural weapons, no armor, no obvious advantages over the dangers around us. By all logic, we should have died out millions of years ago. Her eyes gleamed. But we did not die. We survived. We adapted. We overcame every obstacle in our path. And when we finally reached the stars, we brought that same determination with us. She looked up at the sky. The universe may be vast and dark and full of terrors, but it is also full of wonders, full of beauty, full of species like yours, who create art and kindness and love in the face of endless void. That is worth protecting. That is worth fighting for. That is worth dying for. Theryx followed her gaze. Do you ever wonder if it will end? If humanity will eventually grow tired of fighting? If you will become like the other old species, content to fade away in peace? Victoria smiled. Perhaps someday we will become tired. Perhaps someday we will decide that we have done enough, that we have earned our rest. But not today. Today, there are still battles to fight, still friends to protect, still darkness to push back. She turned to face him fully. And as long as that is true, humanity will keep fighting, because that is who we are. That is what we do. We burn, we rage, we never give up. She extended her hand. So, High Counselor, ready to face the future together? Theryx looked at her hand for a moment. In that simple gesture, he saw everything that humanity represented. Strength, determination, hope, and above all, the willingness to reach out to others, to form bonds, to build bridges across the darkness. He took her hand and shook it firmly. Together, he said. Above them, the stars continued their ancient dance. The universe remained vast and dark and full of unknowns. But in the memorial garden of Valora, two species stood united, two cultures that had found common ground in tragedy, two peoples who had learned that they were stronger together than apart. The Valorians had expected aid, the humans had brought an answer, and in doing so, they had changed the galaxy forever.